Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
Here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with very foundational moral issues relating to family, marriage, and life.
Exactly. And those issues often revolve around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly. So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. First for today, the government of China has announced that it is ending its controversial one-child policy and replacing it with a two-child policy.
Wow, how nice of them.
How generous.
Yeah, I guess on one foot, it is kind of nice that they're easing things, obviously, because that will mean, I guess, probably mean less abortions and horrible things happening. But at the same point, it's still very restrictive, and it is just immoral, in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the motivation for this is not that they've suddenly woken up and understood, the concept of human rights.
Yes.
It's that they're having serious demographic issues. So since the 1970s, they've had this one-child policy, and now they have this aging population, and they don't have enough people, younger people coming up to support them, both the social institutions and the economics of it. Just the society can't stay structured like that.
Yep.
And so they're saying, okay, well, now we're going to allow you to have two children, but it's still going to be strictly enforced. So they have forced sterilizations, forced abortions. You hear some really horrible stories coming out of China, and I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the whole point is even though they've eased this a little bit, it's not going to change. And like you said, it's kind of for selfish reasons. We always want to control, it seems like, everything about everything in our lives. We as just society today around the globe, and in China it's no exception. But we want to control exactly what we're going to get, when we're going to get it, how we're going to get it, and that's the same thing with them. They're trying to control this population to such an extent that they're going to these extreme measures where they're forcing people to have abortions, and there's all kinds of other bad things that happen to a society when these types of laws are put in place. I know China has a lot of trouble with suicide rates.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that is directly related to a lot of these policies and the mentality that kind of gets adopted by society. And it might be something that somebody wants to adopt, or maybe something forced upon them. But either way, I think it has a negative effect on society itself.
Right. So, you brought up the suicide issue. I think that's really important. 1 in 4 suicides in the world happens in China.
Wow.
And women are 25% more likely to commit suicide in China than men are. And so some of the women's rights activists are saying this is actually playing a huge role, this one-child policy, because you have these women who are going through these horrible forced abortions. They're strapped down to a table. They have an abortion and then they're forcibly sterilized, and they go through essentially post-traumatic stress disorder, all of these different kinds of traumatic things. I've actually heard some testimonies of women in Congress saying, yes, I had suicidal thoughts, or I tried to commit suicide after this. I was so devastated.
Wow.
So it's really harming women, and it's we see this loosening, but I don't think it's fundamentally solving the problem because it's still so coercive. A little bit of background on this policy. So it's been in the one-child policy was started in the 70s, and it's estimated to have prevented up to 400 million births.
Wow.
And so what that's done is really skew the gender ratio because there's a strong male preference in China.
Right.
The male can carry on the family name, the family business, the family farm. And so if you're only allowed to have one child and you find out that you're going to have a girl, they oftentimes abandon the child. Infanticide is very high there.
Yep.
They abort the child. So now you have a lot more men than women, and that's causing human trafficking, just a whole bunch of problems. It's really snowballing in the problems that it's causing.
Exactly. I think that's a good point you said, that it's snowballing, because I don't know that they, when the government thought about it, that they really had the forethought, I guess, or saw that these types of things would happen. But you can see kind of how they're connected and how one thing leads to another. And like you said, what it comes down to is it hurts the women. Right. And so I'm always curious to see, because you don't really see much about this type of topic here in the U.S. But it seems to me like if I was with a feminist organization, and I'm not talking about like authentic feminism, but the feminists that we see so often here in America, that they would be outraged by this and having protests and trying to create all kinds of things to change. Because really those 400 million lives that were killed as a result of these laws since the 70s, you would think that a lot of those, more than half, I would assume, were probably female, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's very dangerous to be an unborn baby girl in China right now.
Right.
And we'll see with being allowed to have 2 children if that makes a difference or not. But there's still going to be, these forced abortions and sterilizations. Now, if any of our viewers are thinking, hey, I thought I heard that this policy was already lifted a couple of years ago, just to clarify, in 2013, China slightly expanded the policy, and they said, okay, well, if there's a couple where one of the people involved is an only child, then you can have 2 children.
Yes.
So they had already at that point said, oh my gosh, our demographics are really going to fail here.
Yes.
What are we going to do? And so it's interesting to see this trend. They're opening the door wider and wider, and we'll see if eventually they go on to open it, even more.
Right.
But in the meantime, there's a lot of damage that's being done that would have to be undone. And there are some people in China who would say, well, why would we want a second child? They've had 40 years of being told one child is the correct number to have, and so socially they have to have people,
Right.
teach people actually like it's kind of nice to have a brother,
Exactly.
a sister, an aunt, and uncle, because those things are non-existent.
You wonder if you'll get to a point of no return, right?
Right.
Where it will change the culture so drastically that who knows, maybe it'll implode by itself as a result of this.
Right.
Something that they didn't see coming.
Right. Right.
It'll be really interesting to see how things turn out, but for the meantime, it's a step in the right direction in some ways, and in other ways it's still
Not
the
quite
same
enough.
thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, what's next?
Okay. In our next story, the latest in a series of undercover videos on Planned Parenthood shows an abortion doctor appearing to admit to performing illegal partial birth abortions.
Wow. These videos are disturbing. Every time
Absolutely.
you see another one of these videos, I know some of these videos were released. I guess they weren't supposed to be released, but they were released. Somehow they were leaked in their entirety, some of them that had previously not been released. So it was really interesting watching some of these, and I didn't watch all of them, but seeing what came about, more details to these. I just think it's really clear when you watch these videos what's going on, right? And it's annoying to me when people who are trying to support Planned Parenthood are like, well, you can't even take these videos into account because the organization that was trying to, oust Planned Parenthood, they were doing something illegal themselves, or they try to like hide behind some sort of like smokescreen that's just like, no, we have to disregard everything because of the way that they exposed them, and it's just kind of ridiculous because it's like, well, no, it still shows that they did something, regardless of their
Right.
tactic, and they kind of had to do that in order to get things uncovered. You know what I mean? They had to pretend that they were an organization trying to purchase tissue from aborted babies. But yeah, it does. It exposes the practices that it exposes what Planned Parenthood is doing. And I think it's nobody went in there with a video camera and showed them actually doing these things.
Right.
But I think it's pretty clear by their testimony that they do these
Right,
things.
right. And so the doctor is describing this abortion procedure,
Yeah.
and based on what she's describing, it's pretty graphic.
Right.
The organization that's putting out this video is saying she's describing a partial birth abortion.
Right.
Partial birth abortion is where it's a late-term abortion where they allow the woman to go into labor, or they give her drugs to put her into labor, and then they deliver the baby most of the way, and then they kill the baby.
Right.
And it's illegal.
Right.
And it's something that is a very serious matter legally, and that the people presenting this video are saying, well, that's exactly what they're describing here, and laughing about it, talking about it very casually.
Oh yeah.
And I think we've seen this in a variety of these different videos, the various different things, talking about selling different body parts, laughing casually about, a lung, a heart, how much they're worth, accepting money for them. They've talked in previous videos about altering an abortion procedure so that they can get the good tissue, which is also illegal because that can affect the safety of the woman.
Right.
That's not good for the woman. And so Planned Parenthood has denied all this. They said, oh, no, we haven't done anything illegal. We've just been donating the tissue for, just a reimbursement that just covers our costs. They've recently announced that they will not be accepting any money for these donations because there's been so much controversy surrounding this, a
Right.
congressional investigation. So I think we just, more and more unfolding, more and more illegal activity. It's almost not even shocking anymore because we've seen so much of this come out of Planned Parenthood. You really just see a depraved organization.
Right, and I think that's what you see. It's almost not shocking anymore, especially for them because they see it all the time, right? It's become like so commonplace that they can just sit there and joke about it.
Right.
And deep down inside, I think that they do joke about it because they know deep down inside that there is a baby there and it's difficult. I think sometimes people make jokes about situations that are difficult in order to make things easier for themselves. I don't know if that's the case with these or all these people or not, but I know that certain people in my life that have had to experience bad things in their life, working in difficult lines of work, that's what they do to kind of cope with things.
Right,
and
absolutely.
I almost see that in this case as well.
Yeah, and particularly with something like a partial birth abortion where it's such a late term baby that you can tell it's a baby. It looks just like a little premature baby. There's no question. It's very clearly identifiable as a baby. You're delivering this baby. The woman is giving birth. You can't deny that. At a certain point, you have to, kind of force yourself to be delusional if you're going to be denying that. And maybe the humor is part of that, like you're suggesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll see. I'm sure there'll be more videos and more discussion about this in the future.
Absolutely.
Coming up after the break, we'll see what one popular TV show has to say about Dr. Ben Carson's views on abortion.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova. In our next story, the hosts of The View have called Dr. Ben Carson's views on abortion despicable and pathetic. So, pretty harsh words,
Very
right?
harsh words. Do you want to give a little bit of background for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So Dr. Ben Carson, so first of all, I want to take a step back because we had a show, I don't know, maybe about a month or so ago, where we referred to Dr. Ben Carson's views on abortion. So he had said some things that were a little bit confusing, and I want to read what he had to say initially about this. And so this is specifically in relation to cases of rape and incest. So he said, well, in cases of rape and incest, I would hope that they would very quickly avail themselves of emergency room, Carson replied. And in the emergency room, they have the ability to administer, RU46, other possibilities before you have a developing fetus. So in this interview, Cavuto said, well, that is at the point of conception. Do you see that as life, doctor? And Dr. Ben Carson said, certainly. Once the heart starts beating, certainly at that point, said Carson. And so if we are willing to open up the discussion, both sides, I think we can come down to an accommodation. So basically, he seemed to be saying, in cases of rape and incest, it was okay to take the morning after pill, the RU486. So it was a little bit confusing because, he was at that point, certainly considered pro-life, but then his views regarding rape and incest seem to be like, okay, he's one of the people that is pro-life, but then says, except for in cases of rape and incest. And so after that, so at that point, we had a discussion about, and I had just mentioned something about his views. And so at that point, it seemed as if he fell into that category. So he later went on to clarify his views. And after clarifying his views, and so he was interviewed by Meet the Press, and so you can go look at the video of him being interviewed, and he clearly in there says, yep, I want to overturn Roe versus Wade. In cases of rape and incest, he's not in favor of killing a baby. And basically, he just, he kind of really changed, especially on the rape and incest, but he was very clear, very to the point, and he is certainly 100% pro-life, it would seem. And so basically on The View, they had their reactions to this video. And so what was your reaction to their reactions?
Well, I think my reaction to their reactions was to just look at Ben Carson and say, okay, well, he's trying to clarify here. And they're just absolutely intolerant of any kind of pro-life view. And it's just, nope, you're not allowed to be pro-life. This is not acceptable. And the way that they describe just the really charged language that they use to describe his view, it's just, you see the intolerance of the pro-abortion movement. And, I think it's really important that we as Catholics explain our views well, because I think this particular issue, the rape and incest issue, is very difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's understandable because you have someone who has been harmed very much, and an act of violence has been committed against a woman. And we have to be clear that she is a victim here, and that she has dignity, and that something horrible has happened to her. We can never undermine that. At the same time, we have to realize that killing an innocent child doesn't undo the harm that has been done to her.
Yes.
And that's the view on it. Now, there's actually a lot of politicians who have done things like Ben Carson, a lot of pro-life politicians, a lot of Republicans, a number of the candidates running in the GOP this year have made similar statements where they've said they're pro-life, they want to defund Planned Parenthood, they want to do all these things, but then there'll be questions about it and they'll say, oh, well, in cases of rape and incest, I think it's fine to take the morning after pill to take, these abortion drugs.
Right.
And then oftentimes they end up coming out clarifying later. I think that people don't understand this issue, or they get caught off guard and they're not sure how to answer.
Yeah.
They don't want to sound like they're not compassionate. Maybe they haven't thought it through. Maybe they don't realize that these abortion drugs are actually causing abortion.
Yes.
Because you're taking a pill and it's so early on in the pregnancy, it doesn't seem like an abortion.
Absolutely.
But I think the bottom line for us as Catholics is that we need to know how to understand our views on this and how to explain it clearly and with compassion.
Yes, I think you summarized that perfectly. And I think that that's the case, and I can kind of relate, and I don't know if that was the case for Dr. Ben Carson, specifically him maybe not having thought through it, or knowing that there was a human life being that could potentially be killed and everything in those cases that he mentioned previously. But I know I can relate because at one point in time I was like that. I was certainly would call myself pro-life, but I hadn't really thought through all of the kind of details of the different kinds of drugs and procedures and things and how that would relate to where life begins.
Right.
And so I can totally relate to if that was the case for him. And so I think you're right, absolutely. And but I think as Catholics, just like you said, once we sit down, we look at it, we think about it, and I think it becomes very clear. And I think the same would be for the case of the people on The View. If you actually went down in there and actually got into the tough questions instead of just sitting on the surface of things and kind of not really thinking about things and getting into it, I think that they would also I would hope that they would come to the same conclusion.
Absolutely.
But it's a very difficult conversation,
right,
because it's a tough topic to begin with.
Absolutely.
Rape and incest. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. The controversial euthanasia advocate Dr. Philip Nitze can no longer promote voluntary euthanasia after the Medical Board of Australia has imposed strict regulations. So basically, this person, he lives in Australia. He's very well known there. Not so much, I guess, in the United States, but he promotes voluntary euthanasia, and so he's very well known, and he's been investigated, actually, for quite some time, for the past few years. There's been an ongoing investigation, and basically what they've been investigating him about was related to all this euthanasia. Right? And so there's been allegations that he, for instance, there are people that have seen him that are otherwise in good health, but they're just depressed. And basically, he's gone in and said, he hasn't really done, in my opinion, he hasn't really done his job as a doctor to try to help this person out. And pretty much he's just trying to, it seems to me like they think, and other people think, that he is just going in there and saying, hey, you're in a tough situation, you're having some problem with your health, maybe it's mental health, maybe it's not, you just need to kill yourself, basically. And then he helps these people carry that out.
Right.
And so the board has been investigating him, and the Medical Board of Australia. And so they finally said, okay, listen, first they pulled his license last year, then this year they reinstated it, and then shortly after that, when they reinstated it, basically as a part of that license, his license to practice medicine, they said, yes, you can practice medicine, but here are 25 restrictions for you. And they were pretty harsh. I mean, it's definitely, certainly in stark contrast to what's happened here in the United States and a few states, with the legalization of euthanasia. But they basically said, listen, man, you cannot talk about anything related to euthanasia, in even to the extent that he's written books and he has to take his names off of those books. If somebody comes in wanting euthanasia to him, he has to refer them to somebody else.
To a mental health specialist, not to someone else who's going to kill them, but to someone else who's going to help them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, it's pretty interesting.
Right. Yeah, and he has to practice with indirect supervision for 2 years. He has to be supervised.
Yeah.
And he's not even allowed to prescribe the drugs that he was giving people to kill themselves, even if they have some other reason. So they're really limiting what he's allowed to do now. And he's agreed to those conditions, but he's a big suicide promoter internationally, and he and his wife both. And so it's, in the initial cases that they were investigating him for, you had at least one individual who was healthy, who was young, mid-40s, but who was simply depressed, and he allegedly counseled this person, oh, well, you should kill yourself.
Exactly.
And that's illegal in Australia, and Australia just said, no, we're not going to accept this. And I think if we really look at our views, it's really inconsistent to say, on one hand, I support assisted suicide, but I oppose depressed people killing themselves. And we look at, you know, we recently passed the 1-year anniversary of Robin Williams' death, and everyone mourned that. That was tragic.
Yeah.
And we look at, you know, there's an effort to try to prevent suicide among depressed individuals, and that's good. That's as it should be.
It is, yeah.
But we can't then say, oh, but sometimes it's okay to help them kill themselves.
Right.
That's absolutely incoherent. So we'll see what happens. This doctor has agreed to these conditions, but he's also suggested that if it gets in his way of practice too much, he might turn and focus on his comedy career.
I thought that was
He
interesting.
recently performed in a show about death and euthanasia. So this guy is obsessed with this.
Seriously.
He said, I might just go into comedy and do euthanasia comedies.
Yeah, still in euthanasia, just a little slightly
So we'll
different.
see what he ends up doing.
Yeah, a comedian. I thought that was really interesting as well. And it seemed like he really kind of almost gave up on this whole battle or whatever about his ability to practice, because he said, I have agreed to these conditions being imposed in order to put an end to this matter with the medical board. So it pretty much sounds like he just wants to be over with it, and then if he finds that it's too much of a pain in the butt, then he's just going to be like, okay, I'm going to go be a comedian, because I guess he had one show already and it went really well.
Right, yeah, I guess euthanasia humor is just hilarious.
Yeah, pretty interesting. But I think this is important to note, this story, because this is where things can go, right? And you just like you said, you get on this slippery slope.
Right,
So,
absolutely. So we'll see how this goes in Australia.
Yep, exactly. All right, stay tuned. We have one more story coming up after the break.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, Heroic Media News Director Jenny Eubing offers suggestions to combat what she describes as the often lonely vocation of modern marriage.
The lonely vocation of modern marriage. So why was it that it's lonely?
Yeah, interesting question.
Yeah.
So her suggestion is that in marriage, the couples, you know, you get engaged, you get married, and then you're just kind of on your own. And there's some prep, some marriage prep in the church. And then after that, when you're actually trying to live it out, it's like, oh my gosh, there's nothing. And so she's saying, hey, well, let's look at better marriage prep beforehand and then better accompaniment of the married couple afterwards. So she calls it a marriage catechumenate. And she says, hey, if you're going to go into the priesthood, you spend 8 years studying for it. If you're going to get married in the church, you have a couple meetings with a priest, maybe an NFP class. You know, it's not a whole lot. It kind of differs from diocese to diocese, but it's not a whole lot. And she said, you know, if most people are getting married and we're calling people to live marriage in such a radical countercultural way that's so different from how the culture views it, we have to give them the resources and the support to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And I agree with her. I think having those resources is extremely helpful. I found marriage preparation class, like when I took it, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whenever we took it, it was very helpful. And I think that in marriages, that every marriage is going to have some sort of trouble in it, right? It's just a part of being human, and especially when you're in a marriage with another person. But I think that you can avoid a lot of problems in your marriage if you talk about all these important things and you really know, you're both on the same page about what you're expecting from marriage and what marriage is about. And I've just found that really helpful. And I've seen that in other marriages, like friends of ours that are married, that you know, you're just shocked that things come up in their marriage that they haven't talked about.
Right.
And you're like, that seemed like sometimes people don't even talk about children before they get married, which is just amazing to me. I guess some people, you know, one person is thinking, oh yeah, there's no chance. You know, I'm definitely going to have kids. You know, and the other person's going, oh, there's no way we would have kids, right? And they never had talked about that.
They assume they're on the same page.
They assume they're on the same page. So I think it's really important to, even if you do think that you're on the same page, to really discuss things, vet them out, and talk about them. Because, I mean, those types of things are so huge and critical, that could really destroy a marriage.
Yeah. And that's why the church in the U.S., they have a really long survey that they have you fill out that's actually saying, you know, where do you stand on these issues to make sure that you've talked about them. And there's going to be some areas where you don't agree, but to at least know, okay, we've had discussions on these, we've come to an agreement. And so, you know, Jenny's suggesting that's great, and that's already a lot more than you get when you just get married, you know, in a courthouse.
But then what happens after that?
But let's do some more. So a couple of her practical suggestions. She said, what about having a mentor couple for the first few years, because most of the marriage prep happens before the marriage. You're working with a priest. And she said, well, how about once you get into it, somebody that you can talk about finances with, just some of these frank discussions, kids, all these things. Once you're living it out, you might have more questions that you didn't have, beforehand.
Absolutely.
She also suggests annual retreats for married couples with opportunities for spiritual growth, reflection, and fellowship. And then she suggests small groups at the parish that get together to do things like dinners and Bible studies. I know some parishes actually have these things. I know some retreats like that do exist. So in some respect, these things exist, but she's saying, hey, let's expand on that. Let's grow, let's build. We just had the Synod on the family. Let's look at what we can do to help families, to help marriages to succeed.
Absolutely. And I found them very helpful. I know at the parish that I go to, they didn't have those things at first. And in the past about 4 years or so, those things have come about. And I found them to be really helpful. And I think that having, examples of other couples and what they're going through, and obviously developing friendships, but having those other couples that are in a community that are Catholic, that have the same types of values and morals and principles and are striving for the same types of things that you are, really helps, especially when you're in a setting where you're being guided by some sort of spiritual advisor like a priest or somebody in the religious community that maybe has had that experience helping couples like that. I totally agree. I mean, it's super helpful to have that. The marriage prep is kind of like that foundation. And then, if you have somebody help you build that foundation and get everything straight, and then you're just kind of on your own to build the rest of the house, I mean, that's asking a lot. It can be very difficult. And, people do get through it, but I think that, having that extra help and those extra classes and all those resources that you just mentioned totally will help people out and help them continue to carry out their vocation in marriage as God intended. Right,
absolutely. And I think the encouraging thing is that we're starting to see this more and more. We're starting to see it at the diocesan level, at the parish level. We're starting to see other organizations coming in and saying, hey, the divorce rate is pretty high even among Catholics. What can we do? Let's provide these resources. So I think we see some encouraging signs that these things are being developed.
Step in the right direction. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please check out our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can view more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.